The name of the book is The Book of It. Scott Rahn joins us. He's the author. Scott, a lot of images pop in, I think, to people's mind when they think of the Book of It. If you recommend that to someone, if you tell somebody, the first thing, of course, they're going to say is, "What's it about?" But tell us the road to writing it in the first place.
Okay. All my life, I've been curious about everything. It's just what I do. It's amazing some of the things that I seem to know about. I mean, a friend of mine once said that I have the answers to questions most people haven't ever asked. So I came, and there was a group of us, four actually. We were doing a lot of research into different things, and we were tracking basically a school of thought back through history. And we never found actually where it began. It's characterized as religious, but it's really not. It's a self-discipline more than a religion. And in the beginning, we just nicknamed it. And I never was able to find a real name for what it was. So it just became its name, but it's like a thread that just wanders all the way through the tapestry of time and civilization. It's kind of strange. For instance, basically every religion has its own version of what Christians call the golden rule. Every prophet said the same thing with different words, clear back to Zoroaster. Um, Things that history tends to forget and that are like, okay, it was this school of thought versus that school of thought. And I, well, suffered a head trauma back in the 1990s, and I was having some memory problems, and I was afraid of what I might forget. So I started writing down notes. And those notes, not my goal in the beginning, became enough to compile a book, but that book read like a textbook. And a textbook's kind of boring to read. So then I had to figure out a way to write a book that if somebody picked it up, they might read and take things out of. And eventually I settled on basically the ancient Greek process where it was done in a form of an oration, storytelling, basically. And the lessons were recorded into it. I mean, the same is kind of true of the parables in the Bible and different things in the Quran, etc. There's some very um, graphic stories in every religious book illustrating what this school of thought represents. And it just was kind of strange. So, and among other things, we came across was references to what in ancient Egypt they called the time before time. We found references to another civilization that doesn't exist or not recorded by history, which it sounds strange that a whole civilization could exist, but you're talking perhaps before the end of the last ice age. But we do know, or it is known, whoever started this civilization in Samaria, they weren't beginners. I mean, they laid up real cities with sewer systems, just the civil engineering things that went into it shows that they knew what they were doing. And which is really strange for the beginning of the first civilization. And then, of course, okay, what could wipe a civilization out and not leave a trace? And there's other authors out there that are now putting out books with the same concept in mind, especially after the discovery of Göbekli Tepe in Turkey. It's kind of like a mad rush to say, hey, wait, if this dates to 10,000 BC, then there's all kinds of things, a lot of which I had already approached. But anyway, once I'd written the book, it kind of just sat for 20 years, and I wasn't really pursuing getting it published. And a friend of mine actually read the manuscript, and he's the one that talked me into publishing it. So I published it, and that's what I have now as the book of it, is this group of stories. Basically, the first is kind of autobiographical, and it's like, say, different versions of who I was in different times of my life, things I've experienced, things I've been through, talked about in each of the stories. And then there is, because it's unavoidable, you get to the part where I was studying, and you learn of references to other books that tell what I just told you, that there's a time that even the original Hebrew of the 7 days of creation, there's a time where what's here is gone, what comes. And then the idea of a culture, and people have asked, is this just an old hippie that's writing this? And no, it's not. It's actually what this philosophy entails is the idea of tolerance, unity, charity. We're all in this together, so we have to do this together type of thing. It's really strange because it's contrary to the way the world has turned out to be now, where everybody's kind of self-interested. But even, like I said, the teachings of religious leaders all said that. Um, like, for instance, Muhammad in the Quran had actually put forth the idea, we're going to have different beliefs and different ways of life, but basically the trick to it is you have to find what you have in common and build on that. And the same thing's mirrored in the American Indians or Native Americans, however you want to call them. I like First People personally, but the Christians, what the disciples in the gospel say that Jesus had said is based on the same thing. Your relationship with what is called God is personal, but your, say, public life is not like something you put on for image out in the public. It's who you actually are. You have no other choice. If you're going to meet whatever the future holds head on and face through it, you have to do it together, because we are in this together. And I find that rather striking and unusual, but that strand passes clear back through history. There's no place where it isn't recorded, no place where it isn't talked about. The Hopi Indians have what's called the Hopi Book of Revelation, which it's an oral story. It takes like 7 hours to tell. Like I said, mentioned in the original 7 days of creation, on the seventh day, when God comes to rest, the primordial waters are free to wash over creation, wiping it from existence so God can begin creating anew. We even found time limits of, a set time of 6,000 years to a creation, which in Second Peter, date of God is 1,000 years, and the first 6 days would be the 6,000 years, assuming they connect. There's Chinese, there's an encyclopedia that talks of a time like that. There's things I quote from the Bible because I know there's a lot of people out there, if it's not biblical, it doesn't count. And it's like, look, this is not a spiritual change, this is a physical change. And I highlight different things. And then I talk about an empire that came and moved in. Uh, it's not meant to be a reflection of the United States. It's because the United States happens to be the most recent empire to build on this spread across land and I guess conquer it in the name of manifest destiny. It's that this has always been here. You know, what were the people like before? Well, then what would it be like after giving several ways that's somewhat fairly simple? For instance, our technological world, it wouldn't take a lot to shut it down. And I do describe in brief what an EMP would actually be like. I talk about different things, even from space. People forget that the solar system is also part of nature. It's not just the Earth. We're, by tradition, kind of Earth-centric. In our belief system. Is even what Solon was told by the priest in Heliopolis when he gives the story of Phaeton and taking the sun chariot on the wrong path. And he said, you know, that's a legend and it's easy to tell, but what it records, according to what Solon was told way back then, was of a time when the path of the sun actually changed. In other words, the Earth had to have moved on its axis, which would be devastating. And I mean, let's be honest. Right. It sounds like a big deal because we think the Earth is big. But as I wrote, you know, the Earth is on a planetary scale. It's kind of a small planet. We just think it's big because we're even smaller. And but it, like I said, then, okay, if it ended, then what would it be like? And I go into, you know, like the first couple generations, for instance, the dystopia films, there's already a civilization established. Well, what would it be like if there was no civilization, people trying to survive? I did vote quite a bit in a chapter to what the first couple generations, the idea that things we see as commonplace, something as simple as the electric light bulb, or in time a matchstick. If there was no actual civilization where there was a factory making matches, eventually you would use up the last match, and until somebody figured out how to make matches again, you wouldn't have matches anymore. You know, and the amount of things that would be lost, how they would be lost. That part's kind of grim. I tell people it takes dark turns. And but it's a girl who once knew said that must be really depressing. I said, no, it's kind of a tribute to human survivability. We always find a way. We really do. It sounds really dark and really bad, but something's going to come out of it by whoever survives or would survive. I don't want to say survives like it's something definite because nobody knows. Right. I mean, it's kind of, and one of the things that led me to publish the book, not only my friends reading it, was we've taken on a strange approach to science where we draw the conclusions first instead of forming a hypothesis, and then we look for things to back our conclusion. Well, that's not science in any way, shape, or form. That's not how science works. You have to be open. Okay, for instance, the space aliens thing coming to Earth, starting our civilization. Well, I don't believe it. I don't think it's even likely possible. But Robert Bauval once said that even though he has the same belief, even if the odds are 2 million to 1, somebody should look into it, because that's how you do science. And but that change in how science is done, or somebody saying science is set, I tell people the only thing set are Newton's laws of motion. Fire has specific rules, mathematics has specific rules, and electricity has specific rules. Pretty much everything else is open to adaptation and learning, bringing new knowledge. A, for instance, being the Earth-centric universe that was believed in, well, through the Renaissance, Galileo's time. And, he was convicted of heresy for believing the sun was at the center. There's a huge number of things. Or the keeper of the sword, the guy he talks to, although anonymous, nobody knows who he is. He actually historically existed. He was a man that meets that description, that rode ahead of the Inquisition, warning people they were coming so they could either get ready, flee, whatever they had to do. There's, I said, the different stories, and it gets to a point where there's so much out there and you never find really the answer you want. And in my case, I started, breaking that rule. I started drawing my own conclusions, and I go, okay, then we pass it on to other people, pass on what I've got, basically, in the form it's in, to other people, and maybe they can pick it up without having my preconceived notions of what it is. They may discover something, they may not. Only somebody that would read the book, take to heart, for instance, a hard thing to buy into. For some reason, in 10,000 BC, archery developed all over the world. It doesn't make any sense. I get the archaeological point of view that people come to similar results to similar problems, but I don't think they do it at the same time. Another thing, in Sumeria, for instance, I pick on woven cloth a lot. You have to remember, every aspect that turned into woven cloth, from whoever discovered the first string, to weaving it together, to, I don't know, crocheting or knitting, to the invention of the loom, to clothing. And then if you look at clothing itself, clothing didn't change much until the Renaissance. They didn't even have pants, really. And then it was just knee breeches until the New World started to be explored, and leggings from the American first people were copied, and long pants came to exist. All that took thousands of years. So the idea that when they started out, they already knew how to do all of this, or they already knew how to feed the population of their city and bring the water, that's even more important, and get rid of waste. It's just, it can't be a beginning. It has to be a next step from somewhere. And then, like I said, if the circle is actual, then there's going to be a time where everything has to start over again. Or it could be something as strange. This has happened 6 other times across history. The collapse of the predominant empire, which in current history would be us. The United States is the predominant empire. Whether or not we're the mightiest military is always up to, but we are the most influential. And we also are the center of the markets for the whole world. If something happened and that market went away, the echoes across this entire civilization would be devastating. And I go into, since it predates it, a different possible cause for climate change that goes into what's happening as we cut down jungles and rainforests around the world because we want more agriculture. We're actually changing the way the climate operates. In
Right.
that particular area, when you change how the weather patterns are in one spot, it affects the weather patterns next to it, and so on, which I nicknamed echoes across the world. Same thing with uh, earth events, earthquakes, volcanoes, seismic things. There's actually a pattern, and I don't understand what causes the pattern. I have no idea. Somebody asked me, and then there's basically, it does no good to know there's going to be an earthquake if you don't know where on the planet it's going to exist.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so it's something that fascinates me, but I don't know anything about how to find where. And I'm not the first to go through the problem. There was a guy in Italy in the 20th century had a very good luck at predicting when there was going to be an earthquake. He just couldn't find where. So he went pretty much unpublished for the same reason I said. If you don't know where it's at, they're going to be, then there's the whole thing becomes pointless.
Right. So when people read the book of It and you're saying it, it's fascinating to listen to you talk about all these different elements that you bring in. To me, it seems like you're filling in some educational gaps, and then people can decide through their own filters how they feel about the threads you're creating. Is that right? What do you hope the takeaway is?
That's exactly correct. I just want people to open their minds beyond what they were taught in school. I'm not making fun of the school system. You have 9 months to teach somebody everything. So everything is taught in outline form. And history tends to forget different things. For instance, the Empire of Tartaria. In today's world, there's only like 3 paragraphs. Tartaria, I can tell you, is the empire of Genghis Khan. Okay, it stretched from the Holy Land to, well, some include Japan, but they had a lot of problems with the samurai principles. They were never able to hold on to Japan. Samurai are impossible to beat. But you're talking about an empire that covered, in the time of our crusades, all of Asia, basically. And nobody speaks of it. It's like it didn't exist. It appeared on maps until the mid 1800s when Russia started taking it over, but nobody ever talks about it anymore. It's not a part. It's same with, of course, Chinese dynasties, etc. In Western history, we have so much that happened in the Americas since its discovery, so much that happened in Europe, where a great deal of our ancestors came from, that we don't have time to touch on any of that in school. So I want to open people's minds to the idea that there's a lot of things out there, but you have to go and look for them to find them.
Right.
And I tend to be a bit critical of, I prefer books, paper books, because I like margin notes. I'm addicted to them. I cover the inside cover with notes of where to go in the book. I write things in the margins to reference so I can flip to a page I can find, and that's permanent. I also find that inaccuracies in digital formats, somebody will just repeat the words of somebody they personally respect, or worse, somebody that just reflects their point of view. And that's not exactly the truth. For the most part, I'm not like people that say it's intentional. I think it's unintentional. It's just kind of lazy. You didn't go and look for yourself. Now, that doesn't mean, for instance, in my library, I have several volumes that were written across the 19th century of things that you read them and you're like, well, how could they believe that?
Right.
And they're opinions of the day that were popular. I don't want to say everything's accurate all the time. That's not the case at all. But you have to be able to learn enough that you can filter through in your mind, okay, this is a historical event. This is not. One of the things I go through that's obviously is just guesswork is for instance, the legends of Greece. Everybody knows about Greek mythology, a little bit anyway. Um, in Greek mythology, what if they were just people? What if there was a civilization that at first was led by a group of people that actually were, by being the provider of everything, including fire, if you're familiar with the Prometheus story, that had total control over the populace below them and were able to force them by that to do what they wanted to keep their empire. And then there was this big war when it was discovered that, well, these people really aren't the ignorant animals you thought they were. And I nicknamed it the Jehovah War because it carries across all kinds of having a Christian upbringing, but these stories appear in Samaria, they appear in China, they even appear in Incan and Aztec. It's just who the good guys are and who the bad guys are.
Mm-hmm.
Strangely, phonetically, some of the names are actually the same. It's just switched who's good and who's bad. The legend of the Shaolin are that they were originally appointed to be the guardians of the boundary between the lands to the east and the lands beneath. And that was where the treaty basically was formed that, and anybody who's read the story in the Bible knows what I'm talking about, that Satan supposedly was given control of the lands to the east and the lands beneath the earth, which leads to all kinds of strange things because they really don't say particularly what the earth is. We automatically assume it's the planet.
Right.
And astronomers in astronomy, the strange thing is Earth and the moon don't have names. We just
Right.
call it the Earth because it's always been, we've never bothered to name it. They
Right.
had a contest once and it was just bizarre. Some of the entries, somebody wanted to name the moon Mickey Mouse, literally. And so they just said, okay, we've always called the lunar surface and the moon, and we're just going to keep it that way because that's the way it's been.
Right.
So I guess technically those are the names, but they were never actually named.
Right.
We name everything else, but we never thought to name. And so and there's evidence even in the book of Isaiah in the Bible that at one time it was known that the planets were spheres. It was known that the world itself the earth itself was round. So what if that lands beneath the earth meant what we know as the Americas?
Right.
Okay, it's all what if, it's all supposition,
Mm-hmm.
but it's not 100% a made up story. It's a story that's recorded, but you have to go and look for it.
Right.
And there are the odds commonalities. For instance, I've never understood around the world what the big deal is about the constellation of Orion. it's easy to find in the heavens,
Right.
where they are today in the precession of the planets. That's important because I've watched several films where people are guided by Polaris, the North Star, in times where that's impossible, because just going back to when the pyramids of Egypt were supposedly built, the North Star would have been a star in the constellation Draco. That's how the precession of the planets works. Our view moves in a circle around the heavens as our solar system goes through its about 25,000 year rotation through the precession of the planets. And I should probably point, because I said all kinds of evidence, I kind of skim over the pyramids. I say certain things and show that the culture that was Egypt probably couldn't have built the pyramids the way it's recorded. Somebody at an earlier time may well have built the pyramids, but I say point blank in the book, if you want to know about the pyramids, there's whole libraries of books out there about the pyramids. I'm not going to devote the whole book to saying the pyramids.
Yeah.
But I find fascinating that in 10,500 BC, Orion would have been over top of Giza, and the pyramids themselves line up with the stars on the belt of Orion. And there's also where the other pyramids, even the ones they say were built later, using the Niles, the Milky Way is actually a star map, or supposedly actually a star map. I mean, I've looked at it, and yes, it's true, but you don't know what's a coincidence. Or you say, well, okay, it's close enough, so that must be the case. And there's a lot of things like that.
Right. And so in summation, because we don't want to tell everyone everything, but it's so fascinating, a lot of what you've just said, because you've jumped to a couple of certainly threads that people are very curious about, but yet, like you say, they take it at face value, whatever it is that they read, and you're inviting them to do more than that. And you did so much of that legwork, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Absolutely right.
Yeah. So it's called The Book of It. Scott's book you can find, of course, Amazon, Barnes & Noble, anywhere great books are sold. Scott, thank you very much.
You bet. It was a pleasure.